although I think we have some people outside of Texas that are watching this as well. And we welcome all of you. We're so glad that you're here. Let me introduce our panel so that they can get started right away with this. We're very excited today to have Ben Brazina, who is the Assistant City Manager in the City of Frisco, and Rustin Stewart, also from the City of Frisco. He is the Assistant Director of Administrative Services. And with them is Monty Nguyen, who is the Director of Grassroots Legislative Session. He leads the legislative session for Texas Municipal League of Cities, TML. And gentlemen, really glad to have all of you. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. I know that this session has had a lot of things that impact local government, and we just wanted to have a recap of that so that men and women that are leaders in our cities and counties would be able to have a chance to hear and hopefully maybe share some questions. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Monty, and let you speak. Unless the others, I think that's who's going first is Monty. But if you have questions, if you will, use the chat feature or the Q&A and put them there, and we will try to get to as many as we can a little bit later in the presentation. So hope you enjoy it. Monty, thanks for being here with us. Thanks for taking the time. And I'm going to turn my camera off and let you share your screen and talk to us.
Yeah, appreciate it, Mike, and good to be with you all today. I probably have seen some of you over the last couple of weeks. Let me share my screen to get the presentation up. Either at TCAA or TCMA or even at our legislative update this last Friday. So good to see you all again and glad to be with you all to talk about the session. We are in this sort of unique time between or after the legislative session, but before any special session. So we'll talk about that just a little bit too, but there is talk of a special session. Let me talk a little bit about what the big issues were from this session. This is sort of a conflation of all the leadership priorities and sort of the big issues that dominated the discussion this last legislative session. It was a session of big numbers. Budget, we came into this last session with a $24 billion surplus. That's on top of a $33 billion surplus from the session prior to that. So the legislature this year, without much drama, passed a $338 billion biennial budget. So one of the largest budgets in state history. It's a 1.2% increase over last budget in all funds and a 5.1% increase of GR funds from the previous session. So big numbers. And on top of that, the rainy day fund, the ESF fund that the state sits on, which is their reserves, it's almost at its constitutional cap of $26 billion. So healthy finance at the state level. Senate Bill 2 was the big issue this session, last session, and kind of even the primaries leading up to this one and dominated this session. This is the big education savings account issue, vouchers. This was an issue, a priority of the governor and leadership this last session, and wound up passing Senate Bill 2, which sets aside $1 billion a year for 100,000 school-age children. That's out of 5.8 million school-age children. So just 100,000 of those kids on a pilot program, largest pilot program in the country, and $1 billion spent per year on education savings accounts. House Bill 2 is the other side of that, and sort of historic funding for public education in Texas schools. The legislature under House Bill 2 authorized $8.5 billion of new public ed funding. So a good sizable chunk of money, primarily going for teacher pay raises, but going to our public schools. The big property tax relief package this session, Senate Bill 4, Senate Bill 23, and House Bill 9. This was the preferred mechanism this session for property tax relief. It was a big issue last session as well. I have to start saying 2 sessions ago now, but the session before last, in that they provided $6.5 billion in property tax relief, $3.5 billion in school rate compression, so compressing school district tax rates. But Senate Bill 4 is the increase in the state homestead exemption from $100,000 to $140,000. Senate Bill 23 is an increase in the $100,000 to $200,000 for seniors. And then House Bill 9 is probably the one impact it'll have on city budgets. That's an increase in the business personal property tax exemption from $2,500 to $125,000. So there'll be some impact to local budgets on that delta there that is on behalf of House Bill 9. So Senate Bill 7 and HJR 7 are the big water funding bills this session. Water is a big issue, as you can imagine, at the legislative level. $150 billion in need across the state, and HGR 7 that will be on the ballot in November will set aside $1 billion of that for new water supply, new water infrastructure. So good use of funding for water. And then Senate Bill 9 is the big Bell reform bill. This is a priority of the governors and one of his emergency items, and a priority of lieutenant governors. And so Senate Bill 9 passed this session as well for Bell reform. Again, big numbers. There were 9,014 bills passed or filed this last session. That was an increase of about 800 over the high water mark of last session. So high volume when it comes to just total bills filed. And then of those 9,014, 2,189 impacted cities at some level. There's probably no other more legislatively scrutinized entity at the state level than cities. In a full 1/4 of all bills filed impact your operations back home and how cities do things. Of those 9,014, 1,231 bills passed, and we tracked 262 of those. And so out of those 2,189 that we tracked, 262 of those bills passed. You can find those summaries on our website. A lot of the bills I'll talk about in the next few minutes. You can find summaries of on the TML website, tml.org, under our legislative tab, and we've summarized all of the city-related bills filed, and then have summarized in one of our later LUs all of the bills that passed. Special session, kind of a horrible thought at this time, coming out of a regular 140 days, but we are hearing more and more of a special session to be called on July 21st. We don't know what will be on that call. It could include some city-related measures. We do know that it will include the THC bill that was passed this session that had a full ban on THC products and hemp products, looking more at a regulatory scheme. The governor vetoed that in about 11:30 on the last night to veto bills. He also vetoed a handful of the bills we know will be on the call. But the big issues for us will be, will they, any of the issues on this cutting room floor slide that I'll show you next will make it back and be on a special session call. It's just we have to wait and see until they convene. One of the big issues, a host of the big issues that we deal with every session that don't pass, we like to call this the cutting room floor. These are the big, huge issues, almost existential issues to some extent, that were considered this last 140 days but didn't pass. We spent a lot of political capital on these bills. Property taxes and sales tax, you can see a lowering of the rollback rate from 3.5 to anywhere from 0 to 3.5. We saw all sorts of measures that lowered that, as well as measures that would have required a supermajority vote of the public to approve any tax rate increase or debt issuance. And then sourcing changes, local sales tax sourcing changes. We saw bills again this session that would move from origin sourcing to destination sourcing. One of the big issues that last session was debt limitations. And I know Rustin and Ben and I probably talked more about House Bill 19 and some of the limitations on debt than we did most bills this session. But really trying to eliminate the issuances of COs, even preventing you from issuing debt if your debt service was larger than 20% of your property tax collections, all sort of versions of the debt limitations at the local level that we would have seen but didn't pass, as well as expenditure caps, having some population times inflation sort of multiplier on your expenditures to move forward. A lot of land use issues, and we'll talk about a few of those as we move forward that did pass, but ETJ elimination was one of the big issues we thought this session might be on the table, as we've seen this annexation reform over the last, probably since 17, when we started to first see the cities lose the ability to unilaterally annex. And so we've seen that natural progression of lost annexation authority, and then the loss of the ETJ, and especially under Senate Bill 2038 from last session, that allowed folks to get out. Third-party review is we've talked shot clock a lot on this, on most legislative calls and legislative sessions. We dealt with the shot clock. There was issues last session, House Bill 14, that allowed for a developer to go to a third-party reviewer after 15 days. This would allow them to go directly to that third-party review process. And so bypassing the city process altogether. That was House Bill 23, didn't pass. Density is a big issue that we'll talk about, and accessory dwelling units by right, or was a bill that almost crossed the finish line 2 sessions ago and did so again this session, but died on the House calendar, as well as allowing churches to use their religious owned land for higher density development. That didn't pass. Super preemption, if y'all been on any TML calls, you've heard us talk about 2127s. The opponents call it the Death Star, or the proponents call it the Death Star bill. There was sort of a doubling down of that concept this year by allowing and expanding that concept to be for the elections code, the penal code, and even some local government code. The most egregious part of that expansion of that super preemption bill was allowing the AG to kind of get involved and hold sales taxes for cities. And so that was our biggest concern, was this sort of penalty mechanism on the front end, allowing them to hold those on the front end before any due process or any finding of guilt or violation of the statute. And so that one was one that we were worried about towards the end. Community censorship is an issue that we see every session. That's the issue of not allowing city officials or cities to spend any money to influence the process down here in Austin. I know cities have hire folks, to navigate the process down here during a session for hotel taxes or convention centers or things like that. This would have prevented those from cities from joining TML to do that work, or hiring folks from the outside to do that work as well. That bill also died in the process. Camping ban penalties for cities that have camping bans that don't enforce it allowed the AG to come in to use DPS to clean those camps and withhold sales taxes. And then one of the big issues of this session too, that I think, the time just wasn't right, but it's coming. And that's the elimination of the May uniform election date and moving everything to November. Senate Bill 1209 was the bill this last session that eliminated the May date, moved all council elections, all debt issuances, all tax rate elections to November. And so we're seeing that more and more, but just know that that's kind of coming. And the one utilities bill that would have required cities to pay for relocation of utility lines if the city has to widen a street or do any utility work, and it would have made the city front those costs. And so was able to beat that back as well. Very light tax session this go around. These are some of the bills that did pass. I mentioned House Bill 9, a couple other just sort of esoteric property tax issues, dealing with the calculation of disaster tax rates, as well as minimum debt service for debt issuances. The two things that I will mention on this slide here, House Bill 103, 3526, which is a local debt database. There's a reporting requirement, and by January 1st of this year or next year, you'll have to report 10 years of debt issuances to the controller. In fact, House Bill 103 is to the controller, 3526 to the Bond Review Board, which is slightly different, but we'll be issuing some guidance on those dates through the TML legislative update, and happy to keep you informed as we move closer to January 1st. One audit bill, this was probably one of the worst bills of the session to pass. And I said all that cutting room floor stuff, and Ben and Rustin and I have talked about this before, but it was a really good session for cities kind of moving forward. And, once you look past all the things that didn't pass, there's not much really of true impact that passed, but these are the bills that we've got to report on. Senate Bill 1851 was an audit bill. And I know most of the cities probably on this call do your required audit after your fiscal year. You've got 180 days to do that audit and file it with the city secretary. There are no penalties, or were no penalties, for failing to file that audit, but now there are. This was brought to the authors by a mayor in one of their districts who they were going to increase their tax rate, and the mayor asked for their audit and they hadn't done it. And so he brought this bill to the authors. But this says if you fail to comply with that audit requirement, that the city is held at their no new revenue rate until that audit is complete. And so again, most of y'all probably do your audits pretty diligently. This is likely to impact probably the smallest of cities. And so we'll continue to offer some guidance on how to comply with that. That we do at TML have a new financial services division that we're looking at ways that we can provide some services to those small cities that do find themselves in a pinch trying to get that audit done. And so we'll be reporting on that as well. Probably the biggest issue, I don't know, I'll just pause for a second. If there's anything, Rustin or Ben, I feel like I'm dominating, but or I can kind of move through, we can kind of, okay. Some of the big conversations this session were around housing affordability. That was probably the biggest theme, our most pronounced theme for cities this go around, where how do we provide for affordable housing? And some of that narrative, y'all know, gets caught up and gets blamed on cities and city zoning authority. Largely it's a function of various issues: inventory, interest rates at the time, really inflation, really have caused housing to be less affordable over the years. But part of that equation is city zoning. And so what we saw this last session was really a focus on density and how are we providing for that housing affordability and bringing down the price of housing. And so density is a lot of that conversation. Senate Bill 15 is a tiny lot bill. We saw this tiny lot bill 2 sessions ago that would have been bracketed to the larger cities, but would have prohibited you from having a lot size larger than 1,400 square feet. And that was for all neighborhoods. This session's version was slightly different, Senate Bill 15. And again, let me just kind of preface this by saying 15,840 and 2477 are all bracketed. There's a similar bracket, and they affect cities over 150,000 and counties of 300,000 or more. There are about 19 cities in that bracket, but these were bracketed to the larger cities. And the tiny lot bill is you can't prohibit a lot size greater than 300 or 3,000 square feet, and that is for any unmapped, unplatted greenfield or any undeveloped area in the city in that population bracket. So not as egregious, not as far-reaching, but just for future developments. 840 is allowing for the conversion and allowing for mixed family multi-use residential in commercial areas. So think about downtown office buildings, allowing for developers to come in to convert those for residential space. And 2477 is very similar to that, and that just deals with the conversion portion only, and so very similar in application. Senate Bill 1567 is a bill dealing with cities prohibiting occupancy based on various factors. And what 1567 does, and its final iteration too, this is even more bracketed to cities less than 250,000 and with college campuses of 20,000 or more, just saying that cities can't regulate occupancy based on family relationship, occupation, and things like that. And so this came from the city of College Station and some Texas A&M students who brought this to the authors. But again, only applies to now 5 cities in the state. So those are the big density measures this last session. Some zoning issues. 24 was a bill that we supported that deals with the protest threshold, and when cities want to create more density, it raises that 20% threshold for zoning protest to 60%, and then lowers that supermajority rate or supermajority of council to a simple majority. Then a few other just bills. One's on 785 that kind of clarifies that cities have to allow for HUD code manufactured homes in at least one residential area or one specific zoned area. Development, again, is big this session. We heard in some interim hearings, and there was a lot of talk about impact fees this last session, and even in the interim about the elimination of impact fees. And so we did see a bill, Senate Bill 1883, that sort of set some parameters, some pre-notice requirements, some other parameters around impact fees and the limitations thereof. You can't increase your impact fee until every 3 years. And so a few guardrails around that, but again, in light of complete elimination thereof, then that was a good resolution. 21 is housing finance corporations. We dealt with PFCs, public facility corporations, a couple of sessions ago. That's allowing a city, for those of y'all, that allows a city or a county or a housing authority to sort of join up with a developer to offer tax exempt land for affordable housing. What some sponsoring authorities have been doing is going into other areas and pulling property off the tax rolls. So we closed that loophole for the PFC statute, which moved everybody and developers over to this HFC statute. And so we closed a similar loophole in House Bill 21 that just gives cities the opportunity to veto that property coming off the rolls from another entity outside that city's jurisdiction. So good bill there on 21. And another development issue in 2559, development moratoriums, set some pre-notice requirements around that and when you can issue a development moratorium for how long. I'll kind of just briefly mention a few of these on these next slides and kind of turn it over to the other guys. But Senate Bill 1844 is a big disannexation bill this session. This was sort of in its original form said that if you weren't providing full municipal services to an area in your city, not an annexed area, but just in any area in your city, that was as defined by the bill itself, then they could petition to be removed from the city. This was aimed at one area here in Austin on the lake, but was broad sweeping. And what 1844 wound up looking like in the end was that if you were on a navigable waterway and you weren't brought in under a service plan, and really starts to narrow this down. I don't think it's just Austin, but it's obviously more narrow than it was in the beginning. Then those folks, and if they weren't providing water or wastewater, and you're providing it elsewhere in your city, then those folks could petition to get out. And so we'll see where that kind of moves forward from here, from that neighborhood in Austin. Public safety, always strong public safety sessions. Uvalde Strong Act was a bill brought to the legislature by the former mayor of Uvalde, who ran for the House and won. Don McLaughlin, he was the mayor during the Robb Elementary School shooting. And 33, our Police Chiefs Association, we represent the Police Chiefs Association as well, work with Mayor McLaughlin, Representative McLaughlin, to sort of set some parameters on information sharing between police departments in an active shooter environment, and some tactical equipment sharing and things like that. But a good response to the Robb Elementary shooting. A few personnel, public safety issues. 198 requires a cancer screening for firefighters after 5 years, and then a yearly update after that. Some expansion of presumption as far as when a police officer or first responder gets off a shift. And so some expanded disease benefits for retired first responders. So a couple of public safety personnel issues. Some good grants for public police departments for various reasons and uses. And so this was part of our seeking reduction in passage category, one of our higher categories at TML. So good grants for police departments. Heavy focus on open government. I will mention House Bill 1522, which sets out, you have a 72-hour posting notice for council agendas. This moves that to 3 business days. So moves it up slightly. This came from a member's district and a beef with his city and their budget hearing. And so that was sort of the big bill of the session that sort of moved that 72 hours to 3 business days. Again, all these summaries are on our website too. You can access any of this in this webinar. A couple of elections bills. This is a tax increase on your ballot language for any tax issuance, increase, or reauthorization. For debt increases or for debt issuances, you have to put this as a tax increase in all 16 font. Good bill in 1494, allowing for cities to move from the May to November date. Again, I mentioned big water bill of the session, Texas Water Fund. That's $1 billion a year set aside for the next 20 years. They take that as sales tax collections. So anything over $46 billion in state sales tax collections, that next billion goes for new water supply and water infrastructure. A couple of third-party backup power generator bills, 1202 and 1252. These were bills that were pushed by Tesla and Generac and Base Power and some others that sort of take the city regulatory system out of these backup power system reviews and allowing folks to go to a third party for those development documents. So just know that those are out there. City administration, I'll mention a couple because we get a lot of questions on House Bill 762 and 2237. That's severance pay limitations for city managers. This was an issue sort of described by the authors as passion project that wanted to get at, quote, golden parachutes, focused on superintendents, city managers and others, but limits severance pay to 20 weeks for any city manager contract entered into after September 1st. So know that that's there. Then a lot of food, home-based business and food truck regulation preemption, a lot of consolidation, that preemption at the state level. And we saw that at a couple of junctures here with cottage food production, with restaurant regulations. I'll just end on one bill and be happy to answer any questions after other panelists speak. But 1173 is an increase in the competitive bidding threshold. This is one of, I think, the better bills of the session. Increases that threshold from 50,000 to 100,000. And so I think a good bill for purchasers and cities as we move forward. That had been raised in like 20-something years. And so it's good to kind of raise that sort of to match inflation. But Mike, that's all I've got. I'll turn it over to the panels. I just kind of want to make mention of a few of our resources. Again, our legislative update goes out every Friday, not this Friday because of the holiday, with pertinent information in there, as well as our post-session updates. We'll spend the summer sort of running updates on some of the bills that I talked about and how do you implement those and sort of the dynamics of those specific bills. So look for that. And again, just a full list of bills on our website that provide summaries and additional information. Back to you, Mike.
Super, Monty. Thank you so much. Let me throw it over here to Ben and Rustin. And you guys have been really involved in this. This session is all these sessions since I've known you. Talk a little bit about it from your perspective, and give us some insight from your position.
Well, thank you, Monty, and thank you to everybody. Great job, Monty, on your presentation. Appreciate it, Mike. You know, the legislative session, as Monty mentioned, wasn't as bad on cities this session, probably because we've been put through the ringer the last 6 years or so. But all things considering, there's a lot on that cutting room floor slide, those couple of slides that Monty shared. As he mentioned, that House Bill 19 was a huge threat, not only to Frisco, but any city that really issues debt. That really would have impacted general obligation debt, voter approved debt, which was very scary. And so we actually had an opportunity to meet and visit with the bill author on that, and fortunately didn't go anywhere. But looking forward to next session already. I know we got a special called session that some of these items, in particular, citizen advocacy or taxpayer funded lobbying, may come back. But pivoting to the 90th legislative session, if you step back and you look at what's going to happen there with the governor's general election, lieutenant governor, attorney general, clearly there's going to be a contested Senate race there with Cornyn and Paxton. So it's going to be messy again. This year, with the new speaker, kind of slowed things initially. The House took a while to ramp up, which is good because time is on our side. But that's kind of my input. Rustin, I don't know what you wanted to share.
Yeah, I think that this session, like Monty said, and like Ben said, it wasn't as bad for cities. One thing that I kind of noticed this session that I didn't notice in the 88th was there was not maybe as much resentment towards cities. I remember on several occasions there were senators and there was House reps that actually said, well, my city would never do that. They were actually standing up for cities. So hopefully that resentment in some ways is starting to change. Let's hope. I think for us, one of the things that we really did going into this session was having a lot of meetings with our delegation before they go down there. Doing that pre-work in the interim is extremely important, and we found that actually benefited us quite a bit. Especially, I think of it when they get down there, they're getting hit from 100 different directions. They're in a very tight space. It's very stressful. So the more you can meet with them in advance of the session and kind of lay out your priorities, I think we found that to be extremely beneficial. And then one of the things that I would say that worked for us was finding those partners in the community that had a connection to our elected officials at the state level, that maybe not our council, but are maybe leaders in the community that have a different connection that can actually help you when they get down there and help provide information to them.
Great insights, and we may have some questions for Ben or Rustin, but I see one here from Monty about House Bill 4144. Do you expect any clarification to be coming out concerning what's a comparable health plan that would be exempt?
Yeah, we need to take a look at that again, and I guess Rachel, I'm looking at the chat here. Rachel, if you'll email me, maybe we can put you in touch too with the risk pool, and we can kind of talk this through a little bit. We just haven't taken that deep a dive on that bill yet, but we will be issuing some guidance on that as well.
Thank you, Monty. And you mentioned all of this summary is on the TML website. Can you also share this PowerPoint with us that we could send out to everyone? Are you able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll email it to you, Mike, if you want to send it to folks.
Yes, that'd be great. And I know we've had some people ask about that, and I really appreciate just the thoroughness of it. What do you feel like is going to happen from your perspective in the special session? Anything that people need to be aware of related to local government?
And we could these are the conversations that I've had over the last week, and it's again kind of disheartening to think about we're coming back in the middle of July. But right now, as we sit, there's no city items on the agenda. Now that can change on the first day of session or even prior to that, and so that'll change on a dime. Just stay tuned to the TML resources. We'll be following that closely. It's going to be, like I said, on THC regulation. But then the governor can add anything he wants to. And so what we're hearing, some of the issues like congressional redistricting, trying to redraw congressional seats to squeeze out a couple of more majority party candidates or seats before the midterms. And so things like that might be added. Just no real good solid intel. I don't think anybody has solid intel on what is going to be on the agenda totally, but just kind of stay in tune to TML resources, and we'll be reporting on that as we move the next couple of weeks.
Let me ask you about one other one, Monty, that I've heard some cities speaking about, and I think it's SB 840 relating to redevelopment and homeowner or property owners' rights. Talk a little bit about that from your perspective.
Yeah, 840 was a one bill of a package, and this was a package brought by some developers, and they got this name called Texans for Reasonable Solutions, and they're the ones sort of pushing this density. They had a package of the tiny lot bill, which I mentioned, Senate Bill 15, Senate Bill 840, which was the conversion of residential or multi-use mixed family sort of dwellings in downtown areas and in office buildings, and the conversion of those office buildings. So really sort of trying to increase density in our downtowns, to kind of address this housing affordability measure. That was the one piece besides the tiny lot bill that passed of their package. The other piece of that package was allowing for religious organizations, so think churches, who have excess land to sell that land and use that land for dense developments as well. So 840, I thought, was a reasonable approach. It does sort of skew, I think, things towards the developer, makes it a little easier for the developer. But we have a very development-friendly legislature, and so I think given all the alternatives, this was probably the least egregious of any of it. But just it sort of takes some of that control out of local officials, local elected officials, and those taxpayers' hands. But again, just deals with multi-use mixed family conversions of downtown and residential office buildings. So
yeah, Mike, I'd just like to add too, this bill is carved out to the city's population 150,000 or more. So everybody who's on the call who's not yet there at 150,000, this is coming for you. The most troublesome part of this bill is it eliminates due process for our residents. There's no public hearing now for zoning change. Everything by right can go to multifamily in anything that is currently zoned commercial, office, retail, or mixed use. So as you look across your comprehensive zoning map, it's frightening in Frisco what could occur. Now I think the market will take care of a lot of that just from the sheer cost. But it also has in the bill a minimum 35 unit per acre, which is actually kind of a lot for a garden style apartment. It doesn't contemplate any structured parking or any other requirements, but it does usurp the due process of the residents. And so this bill is most harmful to the residents of your community. And, philosophically, if you're talking about affordability and fair housing, why limit it to just the 25 largest cities in the state? I think that argument will be played out. Why not include other cities that, there's other people in other communities that need fair housing too, or affordable housing. So to be continued.
Yeah, that's, I think that one has, I've heard a lot of discussion about that for sure. And we'll kind of see how that looked, if that ends up being challenged in court. Monty, talk about the question here on military leave for firefighters, HB 2315. You see the question there from Tracy?
I do. I'm not finding, I kind of did a search for 2315. I'm not finding a bill that corresponds to that issue. But Tracy, if you want to email me, that bill doesn't pop up as one that passed the session or relate to firefighter leave. So I have to do a little more digging based on the question. But Tracy, if you want to email me, I'll be happy to do that digging.
All right, very good. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much. Monty, this has been fantastic to hear you speak about this. Thank you for the service that you provide for all of our local governments in Texas. I know there's a lot of interest in what goes on in the legislative session. We'll all be watching special session two, special session 2, and hopefully everything goes well. And Rustin and Ben, as always, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for your leadership and your work, and appreciate y'all so much. And to everyone that's joined in, we're so appreciative. We're glad to be your partners, so to speak, at SGR, helping you to be even more successful. So wish you all the best. We will send you a recording, a link to this recording along with Monty's PowerPoint for everyone. And we want to just wish you a very happy 4th of July and continue the good work. So thank you, Lisa Shook, who's been working in the background behind the scenes to make this webinar possible. We really appreciate you, Lisa. And for everyone that's joined in, I hope you have a great day, great holiday, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.